What's our rapid reaction to the end of the 2022 NFL season from a fantasy football perspective? It's time to break down our quick AFC takeaways from all 16 teams as we begin another week and another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Our Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for SportingNews.com. The 2022-23 NFL playoffs are here. We're down to 14 teams in the quest for Super Bowl 57. That means we still have some fantasy football to play. If you're playing playoff leagues or DFS, we're going to talk all about that until we get to Super Bowl 57. We're also going to stop along the way and check out the takeaways you need to know. Here, usually when we do our reactions on Monday, we look at the game specifically, the surprises there, the disappointments, what we learned from the bigger performances. We're going to do that as a season format here. So we're just going to go quick with the takeaways, one for every AFC team here as we get our collective thoughts, and then we'll dive into these teams in depth, plenty in the offseason ahead with free agency and the draft. So all kinds of good stuff, advanced scouting mode we get into here on Locked On Fantasy Football. We will get in the games. We'll break down the games for you as we usually do. We'll do a quarterback and running back ranking show as well as a wide receiver, tight ends, and streaming defenses. Then look at the matchups as a whole here over the Super Wildcard weekend, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday games. Congratulations if your favorite NFL team made it. And we still have some fantasy things to take care of here on the show, and we will do that here. And we'll do the AFC today. We'll look at all 16 AFC teams, come back with all the NFC team takeaways tomorrow from not just what happened in Week 18, but the entire season. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's not a crisis line. It's not a self-help line. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. And they have a special offer for my listeners here to Locked On Fantasy Football. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. We are free and available to you on all platforms. All right, let's dive in. We'll go in alphabetical order, so we'll hit all 16 teams. We'll go from the Baltimore Ravens, Denver Broncos in our first segment, then go Texans to Chargers, and then close looking at Dolphins and Titans. So we're covering the playoff teams as well here from a regular season perspective. For the playoffs, the Ravens are hoping to have Lamar Jackson back. Now, Lamar Jackson's season has been seen as a disappointment. First of all, his availability for many of these games in the second half of the season has been frustrating. Number two, he started really hot. He was the QB1 on the board. He was dominating, had those big games. They were passing at a high level, and then everything just kind of fell apart. He kind of became a middling QB you couldn't trust in fantasy football. In the end, he ends up, in terms of average fantasy points per game, at QB6. So that's kind of where we had him ranked. It was just the scoring was not where we expected and not reliable, and then he was not playing for most of the season down the stretch when we needed him in fantasy football. So we'll see if Lamar Jackson can suit up here for the Ravens, returning from his knee injury. They were very careful. They did rest Mark Andrews, didn't play Tyler Huntley. He had the wrist injury, and so they were careful about playing him. They also didn't play J.K. Dobbins. So they were clearly resting players, putting health first ahead of trying to get the home field for this wildcard game, the 3-6 game it turns out to be against the Bengals. So they returned to Cincinnati to play again here this weekend. So looking at that, it's a Sunday night game. We'll see if Lamar returns. But the takeaway here is Lamar Jackson is still a special quarterback. I think the one thing that really hurt him was not having that reliable wide receiver. And Devin Duvernay tried his best, but he's a slot speedster, track star. Losing Rashad Bateman, I think, really changed the course of this offense for the Ravens. So the takeaway there is Lamar Jackson still has some potential here. I would expect him to have that contract that brings him back to Baltimore And I think they'll invest a little bit more in the wide receiver core. I think they missed Marquise Hollywood Brown a little bit more than they would like to admit in making that deal. They did enjoy getting the first-round pick in return, but you have Rashad Bateman going on the shelf. That really hurt what they could do in the passing game. And then there was a lot of attention put on Mark Andrews at tight end. They did find another answer there with Isaiah Likely at that position. But Lamar is still not done here as a QB1 in fantasy. All right, for the Bills, it's all about Stephon Diggs. We were looking at Gabe Davis and Dawson Knox. Gabe Davis finished pretty low there among the wide receiver threes in the end. He didn't get a lot of volume and receptions there. He did score on some big plays, but the volume and the production in terms of catches and yards weren't there for Gabe Davis. So because of the scoring in certain formats, he finishes as a deep wide receiver 2. We were looking at him more as a high-end wide receiver 2. I mean, really, in the end, in a lot of leagues, he's a wide receiver 3. So that was a disappointment there. You also had Dawson Knox. He fell out of the tight end ones. He was 14/15th in a lot of leagues in terms of his production. So really what happened is Stephon Diggs got revved up even more. We thought they were going to diversify the pass game with Josh Allen. They worked in a little bit of Knox, depending on the matchup, a little bit of Gabe Davis, a little bit of Khalil Shakir, a little bit of Isaiah McKenzie along the way. But in the end, this Bills team ran a bit and was very effective beyond Josh Allen. So Stephon Diggs became a dominant number 1 target once again. His best season ever. And really did not expect this. We thought the targets would be spread around a little bit more. But 108 catches, 1,429 yards receiving, 11 TDs, which is a career high. So he's the finishes as the wide receiver 4 in half-point PPR. So Stephon Diggs still the dominant kind of target monster here for the Bills. Everyone else kind of falling behind him. Again, so much for being even between him and Davis and Knox, being a little bit more involved. Still Josh Allen locked in plenty to Diggs and uses those other guys situationally in this offense. And maybe what hurt a little bit was Ken Dorsey taking over, maybe not knowing how to use Davis and these other weapons as well as Brian Daboll could. All right, let's go to the Bengals. Now, Joe Burrow is Joe Burrow. He had a fantastic season as a QB1, and it's going to continue in the playoffs. Jamar Chase fell down a little bit. We knew he had a little bit of an injury he was battling. We knew the attention was going to be on him a little bit more. So he still finishes as a pretty solid wide receiver 1, not just that elite person right up there with Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson from last year. But T. Higgins also bumped his value up as well. So you had a strong wide receiver 1 performance from Chase, a strong wide receiver 2 performance from Higgins. But the thing about the running game, it really struggled. Only 3.9 yards per carry for Joe Mixon. He finishes as a RB12 in half-point PPR. Really, a lot of that was based on his touchdown scoring. But he was a bit inconsistent. He had that one big touchdown game, ends up with only 9 overall. So big drop-off in the scoring. The one thing that did go up was his receptions. That really helped him. 60 catches, 441 yards. So more involved than ever as receiver. Go figure, because we thought Samaje Perine, or we could see Chris Evans cutting into this a little bit more, but really Mixon struggled on the ground. They couldn't get the running game going, but they made up for it in the passing game to help him finish as an RB1, and I think that's about where Joe Mixon was going. I think anywhere between RB8 to 12, so a little bit disappointing, I think, because the rushing production wasn't there, but made up for it in receiving, and Joe Mixon still established here as one of the most reliable running backs in fantasy football, even though he's not as explosive and dominant as we saw last year. All right, let's go to Cleveland here. And Amari Cooper had his best season ever. We really liked him as a sleeper wide receiver 3. Well, Deshaun Watson revs him up late in the season. He actually does really well. Good chemistry with Jacoby Brissett. He has a few games where he disappears, and Donovan Peoples-Jones is the guy, but definitely with Deshaun Watson, he was being targeted as the number 1. Amari Cooper finishes as the wide receiver 9, his half-point PPR. That is a fantastic finish for him. Career high, 9 touchdowns, 76 receptions, 1,109 receiving yards. So big year for Amari Cooper. Got out of Dallas, got out of the shadow of CeeDee Lamb, became the clear veteran number 1 for Brissett first, and then Watson, and we see the results here for a big season for Amari Cooper. And this probably surprises you with those numbers, but Cooper was that good, that reliable. We tried to bench him in certain games where he could disappear, and he did that at times. But when he was on point and getting the targets and involved, he was very productive this season. And with the Broncos, we'll focus on the disappointment here. Russell Wilson, He finishes as QB 16 overall, QB 19 in terms of average points per game when you factor in some guys that missed time, including Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson. But Russell Wilson, we weren't too high on Russell Wilson. We're saying he was a borderline QB1 at best. He kind of finished that overall, but really was buried among the QB2s here. So I think he has a big chance to rebound. We saw he finished. He had those 2 fine games against the Chiefs, looked pretty good against the Chargers, all tied maybe to Nathaniel Hackett leaving. So this hire for the Broncos to replace Hackett is going to be critical. Let's watch it going in Wilson's favor. So he's a big, strong bounce-back candidate to maybe comeback player of the year in the right offense next year. He's got a lot of weapons. Greg Dulcich should come back healthy. Got pretty good tight ends overall with Albert O. And we saw Eric Tomlinson scoring there against the Chargers. He got a lot of weapons. Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, maybe Kendall Hinton will return, KJ Hamler. So you got plenty of weapons here for Russell Wilson to think he can have a rebound season in the right type of offense with the right type of coach. So that's the takeaway from Denver. So we'll get into 6 more teams, then close with the Dolphins, Patriots, Jets, Steelers, and Titans in our final segment here on Locked On Fantasy Football. So 2 more seconds to go with our rapid reactions and AFC takeaways here from the 2022 NFL season. Winter mornings are brutal, so here's my tip for tackling the day in comfort. Grab new Tommy John loungewear and take cozy wherever you go. When you start the year in Tommy John, you're that much more comfortable, so you can do everything better. Tommy John loungewear, pajamas, and underwear have dozens of comfort innovations like luxuriously soft tri-blended micro-modal fabrics with 4-way stretch and no lint balls or fuzz. With more than 20 million pairs sold and thousands of 5-star reviews, people love Tommy John. That's why Tommy John doesn't have customers. They have fanatics like this Tommy John fanatic who raves, I bought 1 pair of loungewear and after wearing them for 2 days, got all the other colors available. The only place I don't wear them is in the shower. Really, I have been wearing my Tommy Johns for a while, and it does feel great. And you should feel great, too, with that Tommy John feel. And you can get in on it right now. Get 20% off your first order at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. That's 20% off right now at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. See site for details and get in on those deals now. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Look, we can always get lost in life at times here, and we need a roadmap to get back. We can get our wires scrambled in our head. Well, the best way to combat that is with seeking out therapy, and BetterHelp is going to make it easier for you to connect with a therapist here. We don't have a user manual with life, so when it's not working for us, it's normal to feel stuck. Therapists are trained to help you figure out the cause of challenging emotions and learn productive coping skills, which makes therapy the closest thing to a guided tour of the complex engine called you. BetterHelp has connected more than 3 million people with licensed therapists. It's convenient, secure, and accessible anywhere, 100% online. Whether or not you've been in therapy personally, yourself, I have, and I can tell you there's some great benefits with that, with learning to deal with trauma, self-empowerment, to just feel better about yourself. And that's the BetterHelp you need. If you really need to feel a little bit better, BetterHelp is going to get you there because, again, therapy, I can't just tell you how much it has helped me in my life. Everyone deserves to feel better and their best. BetterHelp makes it easier to get started. The world's largest therapy service. They've matched millions of people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. It's all the benefits of in-person therapy, plus it's more convenient, accessible, and more affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with the therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch your new therapist anytime. It couldn't be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Get unstuck with BetterHelp. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, BetterHelp.com/lockedon. All right, it is time to continue the show here on Locked On Fantasy Football, talking about more AFC team takeaways. We'll get into the Texans in a moment. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Subscribe to the Locked On NFL podcast and get daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories. Right now, looking at the playoffs, plus in-depth analysis of the biggest games and NFL key predictions every Friday. That's going to be huge for the playoffs on Monday. That's today. Local insiders cover the weekend with game-to-game episodes. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, the Houston Texans had a big announcement late last night. They fired Coach Lovie Smith. Let's hope that whoever they bring in to run this offense will value what they have in Dameon Pierce. Pep Hamilton was the guy calling plays. Dameon Pierce finished as an RB20 in terms of average half-point PPR points per game before he had the injury that cut short his rookie season. I still think Dameon Pierce is a talented back. I mean, I don't think he's just one of those late-round flashes just out of default got the job. I mean, they didn't have a lot of competition. Rex Burkhead wasn't that much there to look at, or Dario Mbawale, but Dameon Pierce was really effective as an RB1 for early part of the season. He ran into a bit of a wall with some tougher matchups, but I do like Dameon Pierce to keep this job no matter whoever's running the offense next year and build on that finish, and I think he has potential definitely as an RB1 there to look at in 2023. All right, let's move on to the Colts, and two disappointments here that stand out in terms of what we invested. Jonathan Taylor, we picked him as the number one overall in a lot of fantasy leagues. He finishes as RB18 in terms of average points a game. Didn't finish the season with his injury with the ankle in half-point PPR. So RB18 there, not great for Jonathan Taylor. Way lower than his value. The injuries didn't hurt early. He wasn't available consistently. He never was right with that ankle injury and didn't have himself put up the numbers after that week one game where they tied the Texans. It was pretty downhill from there. So Jonathan Taylor, another strong bounce back candidate. Let's get a quarterback in there. Let's get a little bit better offensive line play in Indianapolis. And he was dragged down by certainly those three things as well. Michael Pittman, speaking of quarterback play, he finishes as wide receiver 27 half-point PPR. That's all tied to the disastrous situation between Matt Ryan and Nick Foles and Sam Ehlinger. Let's get a quarterback in there. Let's get Pittman to be treated like the number one receiver. He was drafted in many leagues as a high-end wide receiver 1. He finishes as a wide receiver 3. Let's get that corrected. So disappointing definitely for those guys. Two of the biggest disappointments of the Colts overall were one of those teams that just stunk way more than expected in 2022. The Jaguars did not stink. The Colts were the preseason favorites to take the division, but the Jaguars instead do it. They were 2-6, but didn't matter. Trevor Lawrence goes nuts. He has a big season, breaks out as a QB1. He finishes as QB8. So you're getting him around QB20. That's a great value there for Trevor Lawrence. He really lived up his expectations as the number one overall pick, that he had competent offensive coach there, Doug Peterson with Press Taylor. Good scheme, good upgraded weapons, great offensive line play. Even with Cam Robinson going down late, they were fine with Walker Little at left tackle. So Trevor Lawrence, big year for him, running and passing, doing a little bit of running to supplement that passing production there using his athleticism. QB8 for him. He allowed Christian Kirk, who came over that big deal. We weren't sure what we were going to get from Christian Kirk, but he was a wide receiver 2-3 we were being conservative about in drafting. Well, he finishes as wide receiver 11 in half-point PPR. So that makes him a wide receiver 1. So Amari Cooper, Christian Kirk, two of the surprise wide receiver 1s here in 2022. So love to see that. And even Zay Jones, what a year for him. This tells you something about Michael Pittman's season. He was wide receiver 27 half-point PPR. Zay Jones was 29. So he comes in as a pretty solid wide receiver 3 that you could have had for nothing there. He was available on a lot of waiver wires. He was productive in a lot of games, had some big games along the way. So he was relevant as a fantasy football starter. How about Travis Etienne? Comes back from the devastating knee injury to have his really true rookie year as it got wiped out of the preseason in 2021. He finishes as running back 16. And this is despite some questionable usage early in the season while James Robinson was still on the team, some limited usage in the passing game, and some kind of hitting the wall games that he was fighting through some injuries. So there's a lot of upside with him. Finishing right there as a high-end running back 2 is a really good sign here for Etienne. I think his usage, his role is going to only expand here as he's far removed from that knee injury in 2023. And how about Evan Ingram? He disappointed quite a bit with the Giants. He comes over, gets a change of scene, gets involved in an offense as a key target here in the middle of the field, working with Christian Kirk. He finishes as tight end 6. So it was a rough year for tight ends. Ingram was a little bit big game dependent, but still Ingram became rather consistent in the second half with his usage. He disappeared in some games, but then by the time the stretch rolled around, he was key here. So the Jaguars, all principles here became fantasy football relevant. We like to see that. It gives us more options when we're playing this game. Unfortunately, some other teams faded some of these key players, but the Jaguars were old reliables for us. How about the Chiefs? It's not the big takeaway being Patrick Mahomes and finishing as a QB1, or Travis Kelce doing his thing as the tight end one. But how about Jerick McKinnon? He surged late in the season. Where did he end up with his 9 touchdowns, 717 yards from scrimmage? He ends up at RB24. That's right. Jerick McKinnon, even limited usage, didn't start the year as a starter. Isaiah Pacheco was getting the key touches after they kind of faded and benched Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Jerick McKinnon, with that surge in the second half, the scoring machine that he was, all of a sudden. So McKinnon, we'll see if he can keep it up. We've seen it before with Damian Williams, and they just go to a different direction here. But what they needed was a guy that can make plays in the open field to replace Tyreek Hill. It took a while to find that. I think they found it a little bit more with Kadarius Toney. Jerick McKinnon, I would expect McKinnon to remain a factor. He's been injured for a lot of his career when he transitioned from the Vikings to the 49ers. He's tried to find a home here. The Chiefs used him just really properly in the passing game. So great news for Jerick McKinnon. Kind of used as Brian Westbrook, a little bit of Jamal Charles back in the day. And really, they needed that open field playmaker. So McKinnon is going to keep it up. We'll see what his role is going to be next year, but I would think they want him back in this offense as a key cog for Patrick Mahomes on the cheap. The Raiders, you had Josh Jacobs finish RB1 in standard. He was RB3 there in half-point PPR. So Josh Jacobs, a great return on investment. If you took him in that so-called running back dead zone as an RB2 borderline guy that you're trying to plug in, overall he finishes with a dominant season, motivated by not having his option picked up the contract. We'll see if the Raiders re-sign him, but he was made the centerpiece of this offense with Josh McDaniels. That's what the strength was here with the run blocking of this team. So that they went there. So big year for Josh Jacobs. And how about Davante Adams? We knew the chemistry with Derek Carr was going to help him kind of stay parallel to his production with Aaron Rodgers, but he finishes the wide receiver 2 in half-point PPR behind only Justin Jefferson. Look at this line for him. 100 catches, 1,516 yards, 14 touchdowns. This is very much a peak season with Aaron Rodgers that you got from Davante Adams. So it was a little bit of tough sledding at times with the chemistry with Carr, but he really got going there right before the second half of the season, continued that momentum, had some dominant games where he was uncoverable, had a few clunkers as well, but everyone does that, including Jefferson. And it didn't matter. They made the transition late from Derek Carr to Jarrett Stidham, and you still saw the numbers go up for Adams. So big year for Davante Adams in the transition, showing his talent carries over. It doesn't matter what the situation is. And you can bet the Packers definitely missed that production for Aaron Rodgers' fantasy value here in 2022. All right, the last takeaway we'll get to in the segment, Austin Ekeler. He finishes as RB1 in half-point PPR. What a season for Austin Ekeler. We thought the touchdowns would regress. No, it didn't regress all that much. He had 18 touchdowns. What does he do as a receiver? He sets the Chargers receiving records, beating Keenan Allen with 103 catches, 606 yards there. So that's a great season in itself. 18 touchdowns, 686 receiving yards. He adds 881 yards rushing. Austin Ekeler special. He stayed healthy, very durable. He was the lifeblood of the Chargers offense. Some things helped here that Keenan Allen and Mike Williams missed time with injuries. They couldn't get their running game going, so they had to throw a little bit more to Austin Ekeler. But Ekeler just proved how he can dominate games. He was amazing. After a bit of a slow start out of the gate, Austin Ekeler just went rolling. He was one of the most reliable assets in fantasy football this year, Mahomes and Kelce and those guys. So what a year for Austin Ekeler. I think he can keep it up. Still only 26, still has unique usage, which is also great. He's not taking that typical pounding you see between the tackles that you'll see with a lot of other running backs. He's a very unique runner, very Christian McCaffrey-like, and right there with Christian McCaffrey in scoring right now in fantasy football. We still have 5 teams takeaways to get to here from the 2022 NFL season for AFC teams. We'll do that in our final segment here on Locked On Fantasy Football. And we do have to tell you about an exciting new game. Now, fantasy football seasonal games are over, but there's a new game that you can try out that you can download the app for. I'm really geeked out by our new partner and sponsor of today's episode, the mobile game Ultimate Football GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the season, lead your team to glory. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches and coordinators, training players, making draft picks, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, and all the ups and downs of a regular season. It's all this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline game. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. Really, it's been addicting. I got into the game, made my franchise, started making the moves already here ahead of my regular season. Also having a little bit of contest with the Locked On NFL host here. So a lot of fun playing this game that you should check out. You can create a league similarly with your friends and have something else to brag about, to trash talk with, than fantasy football. So check it out. Definitely Ultimate Football GM is the game for you. Locked On Fantasy Football listeners can get 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On in all caps. That's Locked On, all caps, one word, in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. So make sure you check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, it is time to close the show here on Locked On Fantasy Football. We have 5 more teams from the AFC. We want to get their 2022 biggest takeaways here from the season, with the regular season just ending. Again, we'll do this with the NFC teams tomorrow. We'll go through all 16 teams there. The Miami Dolphins, they had 2 wide receivers in the top 10 in half-point PPR. Tyreek Hill ends up with 1,710 receiving yards along with 7 touchdowns. Jalen Waddle, 1,356 yards and 8 touchdowns. So both of these guys really came through. They were the clear number 1 and 1A targets for Tua Tagovailoa, whoever's quarterback in the Dolphins. There really wasn't a lot of competition. They didn't really work in a lot of Mike Gesicki at tight end, as some may have speculated, or Trent Sherfield or Cedric Wilson Jr. These guys were just flashes occasionally. They also didn't run the ball consistently or effectively as we thought with Jeff Wilson Jr. and then Raheem Mostert. So when you look at it, the Dolphins were a pass-first team. They pass to these guys a lot. Short passes, extended handcuffs, get them in an open field, work them in the slot, put them downfield. They ended up being rather interchangeable here for the Dolphins in terms of the playmakers and how they treated the outfield. Now, Tyreek Hill, a little skeptical with the transition from Mahomes, but just like Davante Adams, he proved us wrong, finishing as the wide receiver 3. Didn't really matter. He's just that talented, and he kept producing here for Tua and made Tua look a little bit better. And Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill didn't cut too much into his work. They were a nice tandem here that worked off each other in fantasy football, and that ended up with those big numbers for both receivers here. We go to the New England Patriots, staying in the AFC East. Ramondre Stevenson finishes as an RB1, number 11 on the board in half-point PPR. We liked his upside as an RB2. He ends up being the lead back here, 1,461 yards from scrimmage, 6 touchdowns. So Damian Harris banged up, clearly faded behind him. You also had James White retire, so Ramondre Stevenson was the key receiving back. He was the key early down power back, getting a lot of work in the red zone, and it lined up nicely for Ramondre. So Ramondre, the arrow's pointing out. Damian Harris just kind of banged up, not delivering the way we expected. They didn't really force in any of the rookies all that much. So Ramondre Stevenson, I think, locked in here as an RB1 for 2023 based on the current Patriots situation. I think we can trust them a little bit more with the offense. They typically have done a committee approach, but Stevenson was just so good, minus a few ball security issues that they'll clean up in the offseason. But Stevenson just too dynamic to not to give him key touches in 2023. The Jets' 2 rookies were pretty good here. Garrett Wilson finished as wide receiver 19. That's pretty good for him there, given that it was up and down with Joe Flacco and Zach Wilson and Mike White at quarterback. So Garrett Wilson is special. If he was with a different offense where he could be a little bit more explosive, say you put him in Green Bay, he would have had bigger numbers. But Garrett Wilson is special. He's going to build on that. A strong wide receiver to finish, just getting his feet wet in the NFL. Breece Hall, let's hope he can come back healthier. It was a devastating injury. He was the RB7 in terms of average half-point PPR points per game. So Breece Hall, let's hope for a speedy recovery, because it didn't work out that much with Zonovan Knight and Michael Carter and some of these other guys that they've tried to plug and play here with the Jets. So 2 exciting rookies. Let's hope the health favors both of them going into next season. Najee Harris, for all the talk of disappointment, we had him kind of as a high-end RB1. He ends up as a high-end RB2 at the end with his RB14 status here. So he was pretty good. Slow start. If they had started, I think, Kenny Pickett early in the season, got a little bit of mobility there, just more competent quarterback play, the offensive line incorporated. I would have think you would see Najee Harris produce those numbers we expected in the preseason. So just a little slow start, trying to get things going. He did this all a lot in the second half, so again, if he had a halfway decent first half, you would have seen him finish where we expected. But the biggest thing here is no wide receiver threes. George Pickens and Deontay Johnson did not finish in the top 36 in half-point PPR. So, again, let's hope for better things. Johnson just couldn't find his way into the end zone. Pickens did do that a little bit more, but something to watch here next year. I think it's all going to arrow point up here with Kenny Pickett being unleashed more, probably with a new offensive coordinator away from Matt Canada. So just scratching the surfaces, guys. A lot to Najee Harris, a lot to Pat Freiermuth, as we expected with the quarterback change, first to Mitchell Trubisky and then to Pickett. But I'm really excited what this offense can do going forward here with some improvements. And finally, the Titans, Derrick Henry finishes RB4 in half-point PPR. How about this? Career high 32 catches for 379 yards. So he slowed down a little bit as a runner coming off that foot injury. Missed that Week 17 game with the hip injury as they're resting him for the Week 18 matchup, but came through a lot of 100-yard games. Was pretty productive all season long. 13 touchdowns, pretty healthy number there. But we really like the receptions total. Dontrell Hilliard getting hurt in the middle of the season really helped here. They didn't really have reliable second back. They really gave him the lifeblood, even with all the quarterback issues, having to have Ryan Tannehill on the shelf, not much of a passing game without A.J. Brown, going to Malik Willis and Josh Dobbs. Henry got it done through all of that with some offensive line issues in transition as well. So big season for Derrick Henry. Love it. And look, this shows between Henry and Hill and Ekeler and Adams. If you've got talent, you're going to dominate in certain situations. And talent is the number one thing in fantasy football. Don't worry about all the other factors as much as we do here. So that's the biggest overall takeaway I'm going to say from looking at all these AFC teams and what happened with them here in 2022. So there you have it. There's your AFC rapid takeaways going through the entire conference. We'll do that with the NFC on Tuesday's show before we start diving in to the playoff games. A super wildcard weekend of 6 games ahead. We'll do that. A quick programming reminder, we'll be off next Monday for Martin Luther King Day. So just as we approach this wildcard weekend, we'll have the takeaways and things that you need to know there on Tuesday next week. So looking a little bit ahead, but a lot to come this week to break down the playoffs and to break down what we saw in the NFC in the 2022 NFL regular season. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football first listen today. This has been Vinnie Iyer. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you the local insights you love to the national spotlight with daily conversation with the biggest NFL stories. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube wherever you get your podcasts. That's where you'll also find us. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this is Vinnie Iyer. Have a great rest of your Monday, and we'll check out Tuesday with our NFC takeaways.